Today, the case of Marius Borg Høiby has begun, and he will be on trial for 6 weeks. It is Tuesday, February 3rd, 2026. Yes, and Bobby is asking, I'm guessing there are no cameras allowed in the courts in Norway either. Yes, no cameras. And there were some pictures taken in the courtroom, but not of him, which was interesting. So we saw actually some of the lawyers, but not particularly Marius, although he was there. And then as well, we did have some information like there would be no video camera, though, of the trial. And we don't know if any of the royals, like the Crown Prince, is not expecting to show up. And this will be a long process. And this, again, the timing of this trial could not be worse. His additional arrest on Sunday, February 1st, could not come at a worse time for the royal family, because not only are they dealing with Marius, they also have Mette-Marit. We do have a new picture of her apparently taken from Epstein's villa in Florida when she stayed there, I think back in 2011. So we will be covering a little bit of that as well. But this is, I mean, there's just no other way to say it. This is complex, and I think Norway is on the brink. They did have a vote today in Parliament whether or not to keep the monarchy. The vast majority said yes, but this was something traditionally that happens. But I think what we will see, though, guys, is more and more and more questions over the future of the monarchy, what it means. Like, this is not something, it's going to kind of fade. Of course, everything fades from the consciousness after a period of time. But I think the real danger here is that this is going to be a story that keeps churning. And if something else goes wrong, so Magnus or Ingrid Alexandra have drug problems, get arrested might seem extreme, but it could happen. Drug or alcohol problems, a big scandal, something like that. It's going to go really, really south for, I think, the Norwegian monarchy really, really quickly. I mean, they're especially once Harold dies. So we're not doing this, let's say, as professionally as we usually do, but I think this is important to understand as well, in addition to what we've seen in the British monarchy, because I think what has happened with the Brits applies here to the Norwegians as well, which is that Queen Elizabeth was much, much beloved. And so because of that, she was a shield. Whether or not they acknowledge it or not, she was a shield to government scrutiny. Andrew got away because, in many ways, of the respect of Queen Elizabeth II. And people didn't question certain things because of Queen Elizabeth II. They didn't do certain things, especially because she was elderly at that point. People didn't want to rock the boat. You know, they loved her and everything. Didn't push certain things that in other situations might have been pushed because of their respect for Queen Elizabeth. Now that she's gone, the floodgates are open. And yes, Andrew is really the result of Queen Elizabeth II, not really Charles. But Queen Elizabeth was able to, she was the dam keeping everything together. Once she passed, it took a little bit, but then the dam fell. And now everything is being exposed. Everything is being questioned. And I think the same, and again, this is a lesson the Norwegians take. They're kind of doing okay now, all things considered, because of Harold and Sonia. Harold and Sonia are well beloved in Norway. People love them. They are sweet. They seem kind and everything. But once he passes and the throne then goes to Haakon, so people are trying to help me. It's like Haakon. I still probably will never get it correct. Anyways, I will attempt to try. But once he passes and you have a new king there in Norway, I think things will radically shift. I think that's going to be a huge factor, because then all you're stuck with is Haakon and Mette-Marit. Yes, I didn't get the pronunciation right. I screenshotted it for those in the comments who shared. So I will work on it when I have more time. But this week has been insane. I was up till almost 2 a.m. doing a Grammys Best and Worst on Royal Fashion News, which has not done well. But the Emmys one did really well. So I don't know, guys, what's going on. Anyways, but when it comes to, now I've lost my train of thought. Anyways, when it comes to the future, though, and you only stuck with the Crown Prince and Princess, who are now King and Queen. She has a drug past. She had a child out of wedlock. She might have been still dabbling in drugs as a Crown Princess. And her son may be in prison. Like, she may be at a coronation for herself and her husband, and her son might be sitting in prison. And maybe her son and daughter are fine now, but maybe they go off the rails at some point. And so then all of a sudden, everything, and you have Martha Louise and Direct Verrett, and they do something insanely weird and stupid. You have all that combined together, and then you have nothing holding the monarchy together. Literally, the only thing holding the Norwegian monarchy together right now is Harold and Sonia, and that's it. Once Harold and Sonia are gone, I think everything will shift and change. And so they should be thanking their lucky stars that Harold and Sonia are so beloved and so gracious. And I think they honestly seem like the sweetest people. They seem very sweet, but I think they made a little bit of mistakes of how they, you could say, let their children be raised. They made some mistakes, and now they're dealing with the consequences of that, or the permissiveness of love connections and these sorts of things. And so we have this. And again, I'm not saying a single mom can't marry a royal, even one who's divorced or something. I don't think that's the case. But what we've seen from Mette-Marit, and I think is so important, especially with how Marius has turned out, is that she did not really change all that much once becoming crown princess. The vices that she had pre her princesshood remained. And you see a lot of women who marry into the royal families and do, like Sophia of Sweden. She was a party girl a bit. She met Epstein once or twice, and she was in New York. She was on a reality TV show. She was Miss Slit, I think is how you pronounce it, in Sweden. And she was posing topless with the snake. So she had a really randy past. And as far as we're aware, doesn't really exhibit any of those things now. But a lot of people thought the same with Mette-Marit, although there had been a lot of talk of, work shyness and these sorts of things. And so I think all of this together, I think that the challenge here is that there was just no change. She never, like the best word I can put it is that she never grew up. She was still exhibiting maybe some of the same behaviors that she did when she was 22, when she's 42. And that's not, I don't think, a particularly good look. And we've now seen it all come to roost. So we will see where the future of the Norwegian monarchy lies. We have a lot to get through. We don't know the outcome of the case. And again, always very, very important to say that everybody's innocent until proven guilty in a legal court of law. I strongly believe in the process, in the due process of the law. You don't always agree with the outcomes. We don't always get the outcomes that we agree with, but I want people to be able to be prosecuted appropriately based on the crimes committed and how a judge or a jury sees and interprets the information and evidence that is given. So, with all that said, let's go ahead and begin. But we do have some super chats here, so I will go through these real quick before we get to the story and cover him. There's so much to cover. We did actually get some witness testimony today, some complaints from his lawyers, which I have thoughts about. So, yes, let's go ahead and get into it. So we do have Carol. Thank you so much for the super chat, who said, sorry you take money from public purse and you come under scrutiny. Hard lessons for Marius, Harry, and Meghan. So Marius, as a peripheral member of the royal family, didn't directly take money from the state, but obviously a lot of his lifestyle was supplemented by his parents being royals, or in particular, not obviously Hakan is not biologically his father, but he was largely raised in their home. As far as I can tell, he was largely raised there. So because of that, he benefited a lot from the money they got from the government and the diplomatic passport and these sorts of things, which he used to kind of go in and out of countries in ways he should not have been used. He should have never, ever used a diplomatic passport if he wasn't traveling with his parents. I think it's fine to maybe travel with it just in case you lose your other one. But a diplomatic passport was so he could travel with his parents when his parents were traveling, not so he could travel himself and go in on one passport and out on another. That's skeevy, shady stuff. So anyways, and Harry and Meghan, of course, yes, when you are taking public funds, you come under greater scrutiny. You can't just do whatever you want. That's why there are checks and balances that exist. And Carol gifted 1 channel membership. Why, thank you. And Lizzie said, remember to subscribe to RNN and please hit the like button for this Crown Report. Why, thank you, Lizzie. Dawn has been a member, or sorry, Angela Dawn has been a member for 27 months. Thank you so much, Angela. And then John Masood says, the young man is a new set of bracelets in a hotel room for one. Love your channel, Brittany. Why, thank you so much, John. I mean, again, we need to let the process of the court play out. I mean, if I would take a strong guess, just because of who he is, who his parents are and everything, like this case is probably really rock solid. So I think there's nothing else really to say. But of course, again, we have to let due process play out. Again, I feel like so much, especially with the Epstein stuff, people want everything to play out in the court of public opinion. And it's just a witch hunt and a mob mentality. It is not enacting justice. It's just not. Due process, let the courts go through the process and then come to a conclusion. Whether or not you agree with it is not the point. It has gone through arbitration and it has gone through scrutiny that lives up to the level of actual evidence and not fantasies. So that's really important. And something we'll probably go over in a future video. So Carol said Norway has multiple problems. Marius, Mette-Marit, connections to Epstein, Martha Louise behavior is putting the monarchy at risk. Yes, it is all at massive risk at this point. So thank you so much, Carol. And let's go ahead and get into this case here. So let's begin with the first article I saw today because I was a little annoyed by this. So the defense attorney, to begin with, this is one of the first articles I saw today about the case. Obviously, excuse me, they've been keeping it updated as the case goes through. But in this case, it says the attacking state attorney's press conference about the indictment, defense attorney Ellen Holger and Dinas, sorry, like the A and E together, I don't know how to pronounce that, is very critical of the media coverage. She's also surprised by the public prosecution's presentation of the indictment on TV. So one of the things I want to point out here, and this comes from a little bit of background of like debate and these sorts of things, and we will do this in a future video because I think it's just so important for people who don't know how to, let's say, fully analyze information as you would, let's say, in research and looking for evidence for a case and these sorts of things, journalism, is that what she's immediately doing here, it's like she's deflecting. This is her initial kind of statement is, oh my gosh, this poor soul. He had so much media attention on him. How is he going to get a fair trial? It's like, but what does that have to do with his behavior? The result of this trial is a result of his behavior, not the other way around. He did not get attention and result in this trial. He committed crimes that generated attention and that resulted in prosecution. Like, let's get our facts straight. But it's a very obvious deflection. This is what lawyers do. The lawyers, there are great lawyers, there are bad lawyers. And she is doing, like, this is what her job is. Her job is to deflect. Her job is to kind of push things in a different direction. And I understand that, but intellectually, I also know that this is like entirely a deflectionary tactic. This is a result of his behavior. His behavior has resulted in the intention. And yes, his life to a certain extent, and again, we'll get into the actual article, but aspects of his life are unfair. He's had all this attention since he was like 2 or 3. And he was included in balcony events. He was included in family pictures, family events, these sorts of things. He was with his family often and gifted these amazing opportunities. So this all happened and it's unfair. But you know what? Life is unfair. We all have things that we don't like that are in our life. Like Azima says, it's a quote from Boy Meets World. Life's tough, get a helmet. There's a very famous little bit. And, you know, the older brother smacks the younger brother on the forehead. He goes, life's tough, get a helmet. And it's so true. We all have things that we don't like about our lives, things that we cannot control, family relationships, maybe physical disabilities, maybe mental or emotional, you know, or trauma or accidents or these sorts of things. So we all have burdens in our lives in one way or another. Nobody's life is perfect. Nobody's life is foolproof. Even the person who is the wealthiest in the world might have, die suddenly of cancer or a heart attack, like Elon Musk or something. Not saying that should happen, but anything can happen to anyone. And so we all, though, have burdens to bear. That is not an excuse, though, for his behavior by any stretch of the imagination. And I don't even think it's a good tactic from a lawyer perspective, really, because immediately it puts me on I was like, well, what does that have to do with what he did to these women? That's my immediate thought. But again, let's go into this article here. And again, we are on NRK, which is a Norwegian news outlet. It is Google translated. So yes, this is originally in Norwegian. It's not perfect, but Google Translate does this so well that I know somebody suggested a new translation site, which I may try for some more official things. But I do love this because it just does it automatically whenever I go to Build Blotted or NRK or Svendam, anyways, or Point of View, or any basically foreign outlet. It's amazing. So Marius entered the courtroom 2:50. He was wearing a brown sweater, beige pants. He is also wearing glasses on what is the first day of court in 7-week case. And I will have to say, too, we saw his picture earlier. They're very much doing, again, the tactic of making him look a little bit less demure than the guy usually is. The guy has a big, is like, chest full of terrible tattoos. And like, I am not against tattoos, but tattoos can look good and tattoos can look bad. And it looks like he got a chest piece in the outline and just never finished it because he couldn't finish it because it hurt too much. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. And there's a famous picture of him, which I don't think I have handy, of him with money stuffed down his pants, holding a gun, shirtless. So, he's definitely utilizing the tactic of trying to make himself look a little more schoolboy. So it says, Holmby looked down at the table as the state attorney Sturla Henriksbo read the indictment, but looks up at the judge when he answers no to a criminal charge of 4 rapes. He speaks softly but clearly. He also denies any criminal charges for filming the women without their knowledge. So this is a prosecutor. And again, we could see the lawyers, but we could not see him except for the court sketch. And so attacks the state attorney general and the media. So defense attorney Ellen is very critical of the media coverage. She also believes that state attorney Henriksbo press conference about the indictment when it came out in 2025 is prejudicial. She says that the usual things is to present it in a calm manner. So just because, and again, this is just my debating mind and stuff, and my mind that looks for the weakness of all arguments going, okay, so so he didn't present it in a calm manner, ergo, like it's not true or it doesn't have as much power or something. That's just ridiculous. It says that in this case, a press conference was called and a detailed indictment decision was read out in front of the national and foreign media. And this was unfortunately perceived by many as a description of what actually happened. One should not underestimate the psychological effect of a public prosecutor's presentation, says the defense attorney. So I will say, when I heard that he had gone to prison, sorry, not prison. He is actually, just to give you an update, he is actually jailed for 4 weeks now for violating the restraining order, threatening with a knife, and assault. So he is actually now going to be held behind bars until March. And that is how the Norwegian judicial system works. It doesn't work like the American one, the British one. It is different. And since he was actually at the hospital last night, I did say, I hope he didn't harm himself in all the stress of everything, because I think it is reality that he is, I'm sure, under extreme stress. He's under extreme stress. And he has his mom who's dying of chronic pulmonary fibrosis. Now she's being pulled out in front of the media. And so it's a lot of things, but he also has the victims. So there are two sides. I hope nobody harms themselves. I always hope that. So I hope that he got the help, whatever it is that he needs, and that he's okay now and is able to stand trial. But I can also understand why there's a lot of why he's under stress. But again, he did this all himself. This is something, again, we've seen with Harry and Meghan, is that everything hits the head and all of a sudden they're like, oh, what happened? You got to take personal responsibility just every once in a while in your life. You just do. Nobody forced you to do this. He did this. I didn't, you didn't, nobody did. His parents didn't. He's the one who's engaged with criminals for years. There is no doubt, I don't think. And I'm hoping to actually reach out to some Norwegian commentators on this because I'd really like to chat with people who know a lot more in Norway and these sorts of things. And like all his friends were criminals. He hung out with criminals. Like he did criminal things. Like this was bound to happen. And this was always going to get there. So Henriksbo, who is the prosecutor, responds to the criticisms and saying, the fact that we informed the public that an indictment has been issued is not very unusual, he says. The state attorney explains that they considered that once a decision to charge is made public and will be discussed anyway, speculation about the background can easily arise. Therefore, they believe that it was a right and also that Holmby's favor to provide the precise description of what the rape offenses in the case actually entailed. So I do think this is actually rather important because as a person who's technically somewhat peripherally a public figure, it does make sense to eliminate some needless speculation by being somewhat specific in what's going on. And I don't mean saying this as the investigation is going forward. And so I've seen some people who go down wild rabbit holes before a case actually gets before a judge, a jury, and these sorts of things. And I don't find that particularly helpful. Oftentimes it's you can speculate a bit, but the reality is it needs to wait for a court of law. It is not for the internet to decide. However, you do need to go into some specifics into what happened, how it happened, and let the public know, hey, we got the right person, or we have investigated to the fullness of our abilities, and this is what we found. I think that is perfectly reasonable for a prosecution to do in this case because he is a public figure. Like if they just left it hush hush and it's like, oh, we got a couple of charges, but we're not telling you what they are or anything, that's almost worse. So a prosecutor does have a careful balance of revealing a little bit to the public to satiate the curiosity and to satiate the need for information, to need to know they're safe, need to know what is going on, that they, again, have done their due diligence to get to X point to arrest somebody. But they do have to protect the integrity of the case as well. So they won't tell us everything. This, again, is why in an investigation, we actually have a case right now in the United States. So this is very sad. Like, it's really actually kind of shocking. So one of our big news people in the morning on NBC, Savannah Guthrie, her mother, who's 84, it looks like she was abducted out of her home in Arizona. And so we're getting little tidbits from the media and the Daily Mail. Like we've heard her front door was open. We've heard there was blood found. They're pretty sure she was taken from the home, i.e. kidnapped. They're pretty positive of that, which is horrendous. And it's horrendous too. It's like $1 million neighborhood. It's like, it should be fairly safe. She was getting home from a church function. And it's very, very shocking. But there are things that they know that we don't know yet. And that is perfectly fine. You have to trust to a certain extent that the people in authority know something that you don't, and there's a reason they're not telling you. That's not the case all the time, but that has to be the case some of the time. That you just don't need to know. You just don't need to know. I don't need to know what the nuclear codes are in the United States. I don't even need to know where all the missile silos are or what's in the missiles or anything like that. I don't need to know that. Somebody else knows that, and that person is supposed to know that. But do we know they exist? Yes. Do we know they're roughly in the Rockies somewhat and other places? Yes. But we don't need to know the specifics. But you do need, again, to balance these things. So I don't know if that helps anybody at all. But I feel like, especially as I watch things on social media, things get so sensationalized. And especially as more and more in true crime cases, like people can talk about them endlessly, it's almost more damaging than it is helpful at points. And so I hope maybe that, provides, again, a little bit of context. I think what the prosecution did was perfectly reasonable. They needed to clear some things up, but they also didn't need to give away their full case because they were still investigating. So they did kind of an in-between thing to let us know that, hey, this is serious. This is not just a joke. This is not just this is serious. And I think that is a good thing for them to have done. So she also says, Holmby's defense attorney, that he should be treated like anybody else. which he is, but he's also not like anybody else. He should be treated like anybody else in the court. But unfortunately, if he was a random dude on the street, like a lot of his crime friends, nobody would care. But he is the son of the crown princess, and he should have taken that as her son with a little bit more gosh darn respect. For the family that's given him everything, he should have treated them with a little bit more gosh darn respect than he has. That's on him. That's not on the media. That's on him for being a brat. Sorry, just gotta point that out. So it says, this is so obvious that it feels almost a bit strange and stupid to say. But the thing is that for the last year and a half, Marius has received treatment that is anything but normal. He's not normal. He got to grow up in a freaking palace with the king and queen as his step-grandparents. Like, give me a break. State attorney has also reminded the court of the principle of equality before the law. And this is where it matters. He will be treated equally in the court, not in the court of public opinion. That's someplace different. But he should be treated with equality in the court of law. Now, Høiby should be treated equally to any other person, which I think he is, even though he's son of the crown princess. I think that's perfectly reasonable. According to the defense attorney, all the offended women also had voluntary sexual intercourse with Høiby prior to the incidents for which he is accused. She describes the media pressure that Høiby has received she describes it as massive, and it would be strange if someone who is subject to such a tsunami of negative public publicity over such a long period of time could not feel that he's losing all control over his life and over his destiny. So, what destiny? That's my question. But the big thing here is, regardless of whether or not the women voluntarily had a sexual encounter with him, that doesn't excuse him videoing them without their consent or assaulting them without their consent. You can have consent and then have not consent. You can consent to something in a particular situation, but then allegedly, and again, according to this case, and again, I'm not being super specific here. I don't know all these specifics, but some women have fallen asleep and found him assaulting them in their sleep. So if you are asleep, that previous consent does not go into your sleep. Now, if you've discussed this previously as an aspect of your sexual relationship with that person, that is what you have agreed to in the context of your relationship. But in this particular instance, if he was assaulting them and just kind of got to this, sorry, I get in my brain sometimes and I get distracted by a grain in the desk. And so again, if they had consented in one situation and they were not in a relationship with rules and parameters, he does not have the right to assault them in a different context. Just because they gave themselves to him once does not mean he has the right to take it again if they didn't decide to do that, or if they just fell asleep and couldn't. So this is deflecting from his responsibility. And if the women had this in agreement of the relationship, they would have said so. They obviously don't. And so Høiby denies the most serious of charges, but he partially pleads guilty to the charge of aggravated assault against the so-called Frogner woman. When asked if he pleads guilty to the mistreatment in close relationships against Nora Hochland, Høiby answers no. So I found this really interesting. I don't know in what context in Norway this means, but I'm curious if what he's pleading to is technically something in the United States we call no contest, which means that you're not pleading guilty, but you acknowledge that they have enough evidence to probably prove that you're guilty. Does that make sense? So this happens in pleas. There's actually, I think, a really famous case. I want to say it's even on Netflix in a documentary, and it's about a woman who allegedly fell down the staircase, but as they were investigating, they found out her husband has had 2 women to die on him falling down a staircase. And so it's like, that's too much of a coincidence. And that's an actual too much of a coincidence, not how some people say things with Meghan. Like, that's an actual weird coincidence that should be investigated. Anyways, I think at the end of the day, he had gone through the trial, I want to say once or twice in the United States, and he eventually pleaded, I think, no contest to the charge of murder. I think that's what ended up happening in the case. You'll have to excuse me if you guys are true crime buffs and let me know. But I think it has been a pretty serious case where somebody just pleaded no contest. And it's a way to kind of, you get punished, but not quite as severely. I think he got time served, if I remember right. And I want to say it's called Down the Staircase. Yeah, it's Michael Peterson trial. Okay, maybe not. Maybe he just was found not guilty. I can't remember. Oh, he entered an Alford plea. That's what it is. Is a guilty plea where the defendant in a criminal case does not adhere to the criminal act, asserts innocence, but accepts the imposition of a sentence. So I feel like that's kind of no contest. Anyways, just kind of letting you know if you, yeah. Leslie, thank you so much. The Staircase Alford plea. Yes, you are right. Alford plea. Again, one of those things. It's a documentary on Netflix in case you're a true crime buff and are interested. Says further details, he further pleads guilty to a bodily harm charge against the Frogner woman and a partially guilty to reckless behavior. He also pleaded guilty to transporting and delivering 3.5 kilograms of marijuana to another person. I think it was around $50,000 worth of dope. I don't know if dope's the right term. I don't really know that much about drugs. I know marijuana is bad for you and can rewire your brain, especially if you're young. So do not take marijuana. Not good. And says finally he pleads guilty to new violations of the restraining order against the Frogner woman and to a number of violations of the Road Traffic Act. And so the state attorney tells NRK that the first day of the trial has gone as planned. There's been a massive media presence outside the courtroom, but inside the courtroom, the day has gone as planned and in a calm manner. According to the state attorney, it is the statements of the injured parties and the defendants that are the most central evidence of the case. In addition, a number of filmed images have been shown that show partially silent or lifeless women, the prosecutor says. So that's, oh, and I wanted to discuss something as well. When she talked about the defense attorney, talked about him being out of control. They often say, at least in the criminal context, well, I mean, what else is it is but criminal context, but that rape usually is about control. That's what's motivating a lot of it, is this need for control. And so if he is somebody who desperately needs control, yeah, his wife would seem out of control and he'd almost be himself more out of control, trying to get things back into control. So I thought that was very revealing, I think, about, again, the psychological things that he is dealing with himself. So, and shown pictures and films to the victims, they were clear that this was not something they had been involved in while awake. What evidence do you have for that apart from the eyewitness statements? But I mean, of course, you wouldn't have anything other than the witness statements. It is a broad and complex picture where, of course, the explanations of the victims are the most important evidence. Then there is the supporting evidence in the form of photos, film, timestamps, texts, and message correspondences, and not least the connection between the various cases seen across the board. So again, what they're establishing here, because does rest on witness evidence, what they're going to establish here, which I think is important, is that he did this repeatedly. He did this often, and it shows a pattern of behavior. And defense attorney says Homie believes that he had completely normal sexual intercourse with these women, she says. According to the defense attorney, he's not attempted to hide the recordings. Homie will give his explanation on this tomorrow. Oh, that'll be interesting. Henrik Spose says they have assessed Homie and his participation in court over the next few days. That might have been why he was at the hospital. We have concluded that he is medically fit to be in the courtroom. We are flexible as to whether he sits in the courtroom or chooses to follow the proceedings in another room. So a little out of 10, they started kind of discussing the case. And Henrik Spo warns that they will also present evidence that the defendant and the victim had several voluntary sexual intercourses. The prosecution then will present evidence that the defendant groped the victim while she was asleep. She woke up from this and they allegedly had consensual intercourse. So again, this is going to be, I wouldn't be surprised based on some of this if some of the aspects of the case may not go guilty for him. Because again, you do have the question. And there's a lot of people who just want to string him up, but these are complex relationships. And so, like, there's going to be a little bit of doubt here. Later investigations of the defendant's databases found a short film filmed with the defendant's phone camera at 4:58, which shows the victim naked abdomen while her body is apparently lies still. State prosecutor showed the graph with the pulse data from the victim's watch and the movement data from Homie's phone. Henrik Spo says this will become a bigger issue later in the case. So I found that really be interesting that apparently, I don't know if maybe if it was Garmin or Sony or Samsung or whatever, or an Apple Watch, but she had a watch that stated, her pulse and these sorts of things. And so, they could probably see when she was asleep and then when she woke up. And again, if you're not in a like long-term, let's say consensual relationship or something like that, like, I don't know if most people would enjoy having a one night stand, grope them again if they're not expecting it. Because maybe, it's a one and done type thing. But that's not my thing, so what do I know? Anyways. The state prosecutor shows The central question you must decide on whether regarding this record is whether the defendant had sexual intercourse while she was asleep or in another state that made her unable to resist. Typically a state of sleep intoxication. So I think that's where the data is going to be very important is, was she asleep and intoxicated, which means it would be slower for her to wake up, slower for her to recognize what he was doing. And yes, she was, she fell asleep drunk, but that does not excuse his behavior. And yes, she may have consented while she was drunk, but not, when she was a little bit sober and not really probably while she was asleep. According to the defense attorney, it has been a challenging day in court for her client. I find it very difficult to say anything other than it was very difficult. That's all I can say. But how it goes forward, I can't answer that. So he actually dropped, or his initial defense attorney dropped out, and he ended up going with her. So he had a younger guy initially, and I think that guy had a lot of criminal connections, if I remember correct. So the defense attorney said, nevertheless, it's not appropriate to request a postponement. That is the last thing we want, both he and we. Now we want this case to find a dignified conclusion to the extent possible. Police attorney takes the floor after the lunch break. He explains the case involving the Frogner woman and begins by describing how Høiby and the woman allegedly had a relationship from 2023 to November 2024. This relationship should have resumed. This relationship should then have resumed in the fall of 2025. So that complicates the matter for sure, is that they were on and off. That complicates the matter, definitely, for the prosecution. Police have investigated this case as possible abuse in close relationships. However, after the investigation was completed, the prosecutorial conclusion was that the case charges should instead be brought for individual incidents. He's pleaded guilty or partially guilty to most of the charges against her. Abuse in close relationships carries a maximum penalty of 6 years in prison. Høiby is charged with also charged against his ex-girlfriend Nora, which he denies. And so he said to the crowd there, in terms of like the court and all the press, in Norwegian and English, reminding them that there is a ban on minutes that applies to information about the victims. So you're not supposed to describe the victims at all, so that you don't want them to be identifiable. Completely respectable. And I thought this was very interesting. When asked about Høiby's profession or position, he answers nothing. This guy doesn't have a job. He doesn't have purpose. He doesn't have direction. And to be fair to him, his life is somewhat weird in the fact that he is connected to the royal family, but he's not part of the royal family. He was raised, mostly by people who do royal jobs, but he was never going to have that job. So I do appreciate and understand that his life is emotionally complex in a lot of ways, or relationally complex, because he doesn't have a family that's like purely his, because his father remarried, his mother remarried, they were never really together. And so he doesn't have that kind of typical family life of a stable family unit. That he's never had an experience of a family that's just his mom and his dad together. So in that respect, I do feel for him. But again, this results in a failure of his mother. And I put at least a decent amount of the burden on her in some ways, because as far as I'm aware, and then I definitely want to check with Norwegian commentators and reporters and these sorts of things that he was largely raised in their house. So we don't know the exact kind of breakdown of the custodial arrangements, but given that he was still living at her house and everything until this incident and was living there again and everything else, and not directly in their house, in another little property on the larger property, that he just doesn't really have much of direction. And I kind of put some of the burden there on his mom because given what we've seen in the Epstein files, again, what really fascinates me, and again, this is why I want to really do a huge deep dive. I need more printer ink and more paper before really starting to fully develop and look through and see what the evidence actually sort of makes clear. But I just don't think she was a very involved mom. I don't enjoy coming to that conclusion, but that's what I'm seeing so far. Especially when she says, or somebody says on her behalf, well, she doesn't like being in Oslo. Well, Oslo is where her children are. It's where her husband is. And you also got to wonder too, if it's a situation where Hakan is more into his wife than she is into him. So he was arrested again for the fourth time and for cases of violence, threats, and violation of the restraining order against the Frogner woman. So yeah, he was doing it again. And so it's just so twisted. Our goal is for this case to be carried out in a completely normal manner. And as it looks now, we also believe that it can happen. This is the state attorney. Again, this is the courtroom here. Looks like that's where the media is. Defense attorney says she fears the trial will be chaotic. Like, of course it will. Over the course of 7 weeks, the court will hear from Høiby himself, the injured parties, police investigators, and a long list of witnesses. He's charged with 38 offenses, including 4 counts of rape. Women are allegedly unable to resist because they were not awake, according to the indictment. So they have found videos. They will play the videos, but it will be done behind closed doors without the press or anyone else other than the members of the court who need to see or hear it to be able to see or hear the content, which I think is, again, perfectly appropriate. Perfectly appropriate. Emmerich Spo says the explanation for those involved is most important to clarify the case. When there are films or images that can shed light on the case, they will be relevant as supporting evidence to nuance or build on the explanations that come in court. So again, this is going to be a somewhat challenging case because he has continued a relationship with the Frogner woman on and off. So some aspects of the case will be somewhat difficult to prove. Heidi at the Illen Law Firm is a counsel for Nora and 2 other women. She says the clients probably don't look forward to explaining themselves in court, but they see it as a social duty. I find that really interesting. Social duty is how they put it. So it's extremely stressful to be insulted in a criminal case. Then you have everything that comes with this case, which is the enormous media pressure. And so they kind of detail all the charges here. My gosh, so many charges. Again, 10 sexual offenses, 1 drug violation, threats, violence, abusive behavior, 9 violations, traffic violations, 8, damage, 2, violations of no contact order, 6, unlawful behavior towards the police, 2. So if this was a jury trial, this is a judge trial, but if this was a jury trial, I do think that the one woman continued her relationship with him after the arrest and everything. I think that would be somewhat challenging for the case moving forward. I do think even with the judges, that'll be a somewhat challenging thing because they're wondering, well, why didn't you get away? He's had all these issues and yet you keep going back to him. What's the issue? And so I think that will be challenging to manage. And again, that's not victim blaming. That's just how people perceive it. That is going to be in the back of somebody's mind. So that's one of the kind of weird things. So the woman, and this is one of the first witnesses here. So the woman says it's surreal and the last thing she wants is to have to testify in this case. And I feel that it's actually very overwhelming. I just don't want to cry, but I have to get it out, she says. I'm sitting here shaking. I just find the whole thing so sickening. uncomfortable. It's unfair that I'm being dragged into it, she put simply. This is a lot of the press. I was trying to see if I recognize anybody. So far, no dice. But the court has banned the woman from being identified, and RK is not publishing her name or other details that would allow her to be recognized. So this is one of the first rape charges. He is charged with rape without intercourse with this woman. She perceives it as a betrayal. It is quite obvious she had a good opinion of the defendant before she was shown this material by the police. It is 7 years since this allegedly happened. So this is the case, and this could be the actual kind of social media woman potentially. I don't know. It could be a different case because she kind of verified some of the details. And she said at the time, basically, and again, this woman has been public on Instagram and these sorts of things, a little, not like, going into the nitty gritty or anything, but has alluded to being informed of this case and shown video and these sorts of things, that like she came into she was asked to come to the police thinking she was sort of going to give like a character witness for him or something. And then they showed her the video and she was like, oh my gosh, I did not know that happened. So, but we also have, and again, this might be a translation thing. This is a little bit weird. So she says she has experienced Høiby on previous occasions as super nice, charming, kind of polite. They met through mutual acquaintances. Probably means and again, this would be the tough thing. Was she involved in the criminal element? Because most of his friends were criminal. It's just like, I always think, I think a little bit like a lawyer. So I'm like thinking through all the challenges of the case. She explains that she and several others left a nightclub in Oslo and went to Sagwam, which is his parents' house, on this December evening of 2018. She said she drank alcohol that night. Henrik Spo asks her to assess the level of intoxication. She describes herself as drunk, but not binge drunk. The after party was in a basement room under the main house at Sagwam, which is the residence of the Crown Prince and Princess. So again, this happened at his parents' house. And when the defense attorney says that, like, why would he keep this? If he didn't have consent to do it, I think that's kind of what she alluded to. Like, why would he keep this evidence if he thought it was bad or whatever? But he thought he was untouchable. He was potentially, allegedly assaulting women in his parents' house. The guy thought he was untouchable. So that explains the level of stupidity. If you're actually worried about being caught, you do try to hide your tracks. He wasn't worried about being caught because he didn't think he would be caught. Very different mindset. So the woman describes how in the basement, Sagwam can resemble a bunker. There were reportedly several people in the basement that she did not know. Like, why is his parents letting him party there? Like, oh, come on. She explains at one point Høiby allegedly followed her to the toilet. I shouldn't say forced. He allegedly followed her to the toilet. She describes that it happened very quickly and aggressively, but that she went outside afterwards and tried not to think about it. She says Høiby lifted her up to the sink. Then we have sex for several seconds, but I stop it, she says. So I'm like curious. Oh, so like, I think what she's saying here, and again, we have the complexities here of consent and then non-consent. So it sounds like this happened again, and then later he touched her while she was unconscious. So she says, we can't do that here. He says they left the restroom. Then she later returned to the after game. This is not what referred to as rape in the indictment. So this is something different. The woman says she eventually told others she had to go home. She describes a big black hole after this. She says the next thing she remembers is walking out of Sagwam and getting help from a guard in order to take a taxi home. So it's like, oh my gosh. So this is the avenue to the main house. But again, my disturbance here is that this was all happening. Like, the guard was a paid for representative of the government, basically. And he was helping a drunk woman get home because the son brought home a drunk woman and having parties. In his introductory language, the state attorney addressed the charge. He was at a nightclub with friends, met the woman. And then the prosecution will present evidence that at some point during the night, when the victim was going to the toilet, the defendant allegedly accompanied her to the toilet where they allegedly kissed, began sexual intercourse with the victim, allegedly interrupted after a short time. Police later found 4 films on the defendant's phone. They were allegedly made over a 5-minute period from 7:12 to 7:17 a.m. There are also 10 still images without a timestamp, but which appear to be from the same time period, according to the state prosecutor. After this, a taxi was ordered. Holmby is said to have followed the woman out to a side gate. She should have waited with a guard until the taxi came to pick her up and take her home. So I'm still a little confused about how that all wraps together. So like the others, the woman from Sagawam incident has not reported Holmby herself. The police presented what they believe is evidence of rape during the questioning. The woman says it never occurred to her that she had been raped by Holmby, something he himself denies. He never hurt me in a way. The prosecutor asks her to repeat what she answers when the police ask her if she has been subjected to anything criminal. I think I get very provoked and say no, never. When asked if you slept at any point during this post game in 2018, what is your answer? No. So I'm like a little confused here. This might again be a translation issue. Winham explains another incident in a toilet at an event with Holmby a few years before the incident in 2018. He's said to have kissed her and touched her. She says everything happened very quickly. At the time, I didn't see it as abuse, but I have my thoughts on the way it happened. It was very, very quickly, says the woman. So that's the first bit of testimony that we have today. You'll obviously be getting more over time as this investigation, the trial, everything continues. And this is just going to be a tough one, I think. While I think there are definitely pieces that are strong, I didn't realize that because it had been said initially in the initial reports that the woman said she was like unclear about whether they were dating or not. So we do have this issue of sort of a backwards and forwards, which does actually make this case a little bit harder to try. Not to say that they haven't done a good evidence, because I'm sure they have, but it does make it a little bit challenging in a lot of ways. So this is going to be a weird, tough one. And we shall see where everything goes and what this means for the future of the Norwegian crown, because it's not just Marius. It's, of course, his mother as well, with Epstein. And so we do have, it looks like, a picture of Mette-Marit taken when she was at Jeffrey Epstein's luxury villa. So that is her here. This was back in 2013. And so she had a relationship with him in terms of friendship for, it seems, about from 2011 to 2014. But again, I'm still digging through all the emails. I want to create a timeline. I want to get kind of the details firm of what actually happened rather than just reading what everybody else assesses happened. And so this is a picture. And I have seen a couple of these where, like, there was one picture that Meta sent him that was like a turtle we saw. And all you could see is the subject line in sort of the list of emails. You couldn't see the person. And so she sent him 2 emails. According to the calendar, this was Crown Princess Mette-Marit's departure day. She had been living in Epstein's house for 4 days. The subject line was familiar. So she posted photos. 2 pictures were attached. The sender has been identified, but NRK has managed to contact her. She says the photos show Crown Princess Mette-Marit in Epstein's pool house in Palm Beach. She is sitting on a sofa wearing a dress, not a very formal dress, but she's not naked or anything like that. At least that is what I remembered. The Russian woman tells NRK. In a statement last week, Crown Princess Mette-Marit expressed her deep regret for not having had contact with Epstein. She also said she was embarrassed by her contact with him. NRK has said the palace if they have any comment on this matter, but has so far received no response. The Russian woman worked for several years as Epstein's assistant. At the same time, she was unused, she said. So she wasn't a victim. NRK has been in contact with her lawyer, Brittany Henderson. The lawyer says the woman is among the 43 victims who are wrongly uncharged in the U.S. Department's Justice Epstein's document. I don't know quite what that means, but NRK has not received any documentation of this from other sources. However, the U.S. Department of Justice has now begun to withdraw documents with her name after it became known that several victims were wrongly uncharged. So she was not a victim, ergo they can unredact her name. So her name was previously redacted. They don't have to redact it. So she received a letter of recommendation from a FSB educated Russian politician when she was once going to apply for permanent residence in the U.S. The woman says she has no connection to Russian intelligence. The woman believes she can shed new light on the Crown Princess's visit to Epstein's Palm Beach house in 2013. NRK is anonymizing her for security reasons because she says she is the victim in the case. Why did Epstein collect photos of famous people? The woman is sure the reason. He used the pictures as trophies, she said. They helped him attract more famous people and more young women to exploit. So here is a treasure trove of pictures, and this is the crown picture. This is a picture of Crown Princess Mette-Marit. So you can see same outfit, same pose. It's the same picture. Emails titled Met and Met 2 contain two versions of the same image, according to her. Who took the pictures? Probably Epstein or another assistant. They had vacationed on the Caribbean island of St. Bart's in Christmas of 2012. And the new year, the Crown Princess went to Palm Beach in Epstein's house with her meditation teacher, Sharon Mayoshin Kelly. This is shown by recently released documents, which I've seen. Mette-Marit came alone to St. Bart's, the woman tells NRK. She got the impression that Mette-Marit and Epstein had known each other for a long time. Looked like they had been friends for a while. Did the relationship seem professional? No, more like personal friends. But I didn't see anything inappropriate. I think the purpose of his relationship with her was more networking. He liked people in positions of power, political leaders, royalty, etc. So he was fascinated by royal people, she says. So here's some of his treasure trove of pictures. He's there with the Pope. I feel like I should know who that is. I don't know why. Anyways. Connecting with the royal family made him look more legitimate. It was how he could build networks, even though he was a scary guy. He was obsessed with famous people. He used to connect with more famous people or impress young women. NRK does not know who sent the email. The person was supposed to print out the photo from Epstein's computer. A woman reportedly asked for them. Some photos taken may have been used in a way that makes my gut feel were inappropriate. So that is what I mentioned this in a previous video talking about the supposedly inappropriate pictures. And I guess this was one of them. And I don't see it quite that inappropriately, but it's good to know that it wasn't, let's say, super bad or anything like that. So that is most of the latest update. Obviously, there are things going on with Andrew and Sarah as well, as they're dealing with their own fallout here. But beyond that, I mean, that is well covered, I think, elsewhere. But I think in terms of, let's say, English coverage, this case is not covered quite as much. So I've enjoyed deep diving into this. And it's less, let's say, icky than some of the Andrew stuff for sure. But it's just a very curious thing. And when you have, of course, what has happened with Marius and everything, I think it really highlights this. Because again, on its own, the Marius situation is bad. The Epstein situation is bad. And the lying about the involvement with Epstein to a certain extent is bad. But when you combine them together, you just get this massive, massive powder keg of absolute badness. And then you also have Martha Louise and Direct Verrett also combining into this. And I just don't know how much longer, in some ways, their Norwegian monarchy has. According to, I would actually like to hope to interview him here. So this is a Norwegian commentator. He talks about, while the referendum to get rid of the monarchy failed, the newspaper VG has published a scientific opinion poll conducted by InFact, which shows that 60% or 61% want to retain the monarchy, down from 72% last year, while 27.4% prefer a republic, up from 17% last year. 32% still want the crown princess to become queen, while 44% do not want her as queen. 50% have formed a more negative view of the monarchy in the past year, while 6.1% have a more favorable view of it. I would love to know who those people are. Less than a year ago, 38.7% says their view has not changed. So I always say that 50% having a more negative view is always going to be bad. Because once you have a negative view of something, it's really, really hard to claw your way back. It's like you're kind of sort of going down the hill already. So it can happen, like 100%, guys. They can, claw their way back and everything. But I also think that when the dominoes start to fall, it's really hard to start, constantly following and trying to stack them back up. You've already lost trust. Like, one of the biggest things in the public sphere is trust. And when you don't have trust, it's really, really hard to get it back. And you may never get back. There's some people who you will never get their trust back. And that is going to be challenging going forward. And again, you have the big difficulty, I think, in Norway is that, unlike Spain and Belgium, where the king was the problem, abdicate, you got a new king, scandal and everything mostly goes away. People forget because there's new blood. Unfortunately, Norway's future seems at this point to be the problem. And that's a really big challenge, because you can't just get rid of the problem. The only thing keeping the monarchy together at this point is Harold. Again, I would expect actually those metrics I just gave you, those survey results, to change maybe rather drastically when Harold dies. Because people are thinking of Harold and they like Harold. But upon Mette-Marit, I think that's going to spin things in a more negative direction. So, guys, that is all I have for the Crown Report today. I hope you all enjoyed it. We do have a couple of things here real quick. And we have Carol, who gifted 1 Real News Network membership. So I thank you so much, Carol. And we have Shaz as well, who became a YouTube member. Thank you so much, Shaz. And Lizzie B, who gifted 1 Royal News Network membership. And we have Mystica Rose asking, do you think, and thank you so much for this super chat, do you think Mette-Marit is more embarrassed about getting caught up in the involvement with Epstein, as well as embarrassed by her relationship at all with him? I think it's all embarrassing. I do think it is. It's all a disaster for her in so many different ways. It's all a disaster for her. And like, again, you can, like, Epstein and her son, both problems on their own. Combine them together, powder keg. Because I think what it demonstrates is a lack of good judge of character. And I think a lack of some aspects of morality. Because, yeah, she's not responsible for the actions of her son. But do I think in some ways she facilitated the continuance of his behavior? Yeah. He was assaulting women in her house, and she didn't do anything. Now, she claims and she complained that the media is judging her too harshly or whatever. But it's like, he was in your house doing this. He was partying at your house. Things were stolen from your house. Like, she apparently was introduced to Hell's Angels by him. She's complicit in some of this in some ways. I think she is. And, think of the horrible Rob Reiner situation and everything like that. It is hard. Like, I have no clue, because you want to help your child, but your child is self-destructive. How do you balance that? Like, it's really, really hard. I do not envy any parents who have to figure out how to navigate that, because that's an impossible thing. You want to protect your child. You want to help your child. But there also comes a point where somebody has to help themselves. And I think sometimes, at least in the case of Nick Reiner, it might have been that he needed to be committed. But that seems less, in our modern society, that has seemed less like something people want to do. But like, it turned out so horribly. And all they were trying to do was help him. That's all they were trying to do. And that's just so hard, because where is the line between help and basically allowing the behavior to continue? I think she sort of failed. I think she failed. And when you combine that with Epstein, asking, hey, and I've had some Norwegians reach out and say, which I appreciate, because I wanted to be fair always and say, well, I know Europeans have, like, nudity is considered somewhat differently between Europeans and Americans. So I just don't know, like, if that would be considered appropriate or not. A lot of Norwegians came out and said, like, no, that would not be considered really appropriate. Like, we would not, in our culture, really approve of that. And I was like, okay, that's good to know. I, of course, want to give somebody the benefit of the doubt when I don't fully know. But they've told me no. That's like actually not really all that common. And so and she asked Epstein, "Hey, should I buy my son a wallpaper with two naked women carrying surfboards? Like, why would you give your son that?" And again, thinking of the sexual nature of his crimes looks even worse. She's asking a guy who was convicted of trafficking underage girls that question. You gotta think about her as a mom. You you just gotta wonder and question. Not very good. And of course, she's not responsible for all of his behavior. Of course. Always had that caveat, guys. But I don't think she can remove herself from it entirely either. There's nature versus nurture, of course, but I think this is some nature and some nurture too. If she's more interested in hanging out with her meditation mentor in Florida than parenting her own children, you may end up with this. But anyways, guys, that is the main thing. Just keeping it open a little bit here for any questions or comments. We do have Lynn Gideon who says, as a parent in the home, she has the balance of responsibility, but the father just not being involved makes him incredibly responsible. Yeah, so I'm not quite sure about Marius's father, how involved he is. Like, Marius did spend time in his home and these things like that, but he was, I mean, because you got to think, and like from a parenting perspective, I mean, it might depend on his father, of course, and what he thinks, but like your son has he's going to be raised with royalty. He's going to be raised with the future queen. He's going to be like these sorts of things, and so it's like you could see as a father going, "Yeah, like you guys raise him because you can give him so much more than I can." And that's him honestly taking a back seat 150%. But I can also see how like somebody would think to themselves, "Wow, you can give him so much more than I can." And to be honest too, I think we haven't even heard much from Marius's father in this whole mess at all. Like I haven't really heard any, and I've been watching this case fairly closely. I just haven't even heard much about Marius's dad in this, like being involved and talking to him and these sorts of things. So very interesting. So I do see. So St. Elmo's Fire said the Lowney character needs to go away. I'm excited for Tom Bauer's book, Revenge too. And Alice says he can write whatever books he likes. I don't care. But sometimes I think people like him forget that the people he writes about is real. And yeah, that is something I think that's a great point because I really try to always think of the people I talk about as real people and try to think of them and the different complexities. That's why I say, hey, yeah, Marius had a really unique challenge growing up. He did a very unique one very few experience, which is that he's being raised by a royal, but he's not a royal. But he's in the house and he's half siblings with royals, but he's not royal. Like that's complex. I think it's important to think of people, not just as caricatures. Too often people become caricatures and it becomes much easier to say horrific things about them. And so I think that's always something important to think about. A Spark of Divine Tarot says, I actually had the pleasure of speaking with the Crown Prince Hakan, and he came off as both highly intelligent and empathetic. I feel bad for him. Yeah, I'm really curious for him because like they've always seemed very in love to me. I always thought they were very in love. But like reading some of the email stuff that was said about Met, and I was like, was she like, is she more if he is he more in love with her than she is with him? So that's why again, guys, because I feel like again, there's so much misinformation out there, especially when it comes to Megan. And when it comes to this case, at least for the Met side, I really want to dig down through, look at the timelines when she was in X place, when she was in Y place, where Hakan was, and kind of try to line things up to the best of my ability and make sure I have a good idea of some of that dynamic in that 3 to 4 year span. So I understand the dynamics of their relationship because honestly, it seems like she was kind of she mentioned Paris was good for affairs, or though she was kind of saying that Parisian women are more likely to cheat, I think. But then I couldn't help but wonder because she kept talking about Paris, if she goes to Paris to kind of escape Oslo and her home and her husband. And so I just want to really explore that, but explore that in a deep dive way when I'm looking at information and not just, kind of the exaggeration that comes from being online. I will also do I kind of want to do a whole deep dive and debunk the connection that some people are making between Megan and Epstein. I'm basically absolutely positive that does not exist. And I think it's good to kind of, and again, it goes back to not seeing people as caricatures, seeing people as real people. There's just no evidence there. And I think it's good to debunk some of the kind of craziness that's going on. Alice says, Brittany, do you think they might try to skip the crown over Hakan Street to his daughter? I mean, I've heard some not great things about her as well, in particular that she might have some drug issues. Again, that's rumors. Although I did see a song today from Norwegians that referenced that alleged rumor that she's called the Snow Princess. Different type of snow. Also white, but different type of snow. And so that's a bit concerning. But I wouldn't be surprised because there's another aspect where Mette-Marit might have actually been asking for cocaine when she was staying at Epstein's house. So we have a lot of concerns here. And again, this is a challenge, is that there's no good option. Because Martha Louise's children to me seem like a mess as well. So it's like, and she's a mess. And so it's like, I just don't even know where the crown goes, to be honest, to kind of get away from some of this. See, almost Fire, maybe Bauer can knock the Lowney guy off the circuit. I was hoping Harry, not Meghan, but Harry and the kids would move back. They'll knock Lowney out of the way. I mean, honestly, like, again, I've always said I'm for Charles and Harry reconciling on a personal level, not a dynastic level, but a personal one. Still think Harry and his kids should be removed from the line of succession. They've done enough to deserve it. But again, family relationships are complicated. And it's really easy to backseat drive from YouTube, especially when it comes to family things. Business things, that's a lot easier. Again, whole warehouse full of as ever goods. Not a surprise. I need to do a whole video also about Meghan charging $3 extra for absolutely nothing. And people still bought it. Oh, like the business stuff, you can knock out of the park. It's very easy because business practices are general business practices. Human beings and family relationships are infinitely more complicated than that. So it's hard. So Clifford said, Prince Andrew liked to make friends who are rich, and that clouded his judgment. Andrew Lowney has beef with Prince Andrew, and his hatred has been driving him to destroy Prince Andrew. So it has been sort of interesting to watch Andrew Lowney. Like, some of the stuff I think is good. Some of his reporting, not so much. Like, remember Dan Wooten talking to me something about Lowney report. I don't know if it was Lowney directly or somebody else, but talking about like an assassination ploy Epstein had out for the Sarah and Andrew. And I'm like, really don't think that's true. Anytime somebody pulls out there's an assassination plot, I almost always dismiss it. Not that those things don't happen, but oftentimes in the context, I'm like, oh, that's just such BS. Like, that person wouldn't either care enough or anyways. So that's just something. But yeah, it's hard because you find out things about somebody and you do want to see, let's say, justice. But I am a little cautious again with such the rush to judgment, the rush to crucify, the witch hunt aspect of some of this Epstein stuff does remind me a lot of, sort of Salem witch hunt. It doesn't matter whether you're guilty or innocent. Like, the process doesn't matter. It's like you're guilty and you should be like just raked over the coals. Because it was interesting. It's like some of the witch trial, the way they would try to determine if you were a witch. If you died, you were innocent. But if you lived, you were guilty. It's like, well, that's a stacked deck. What am I supposed to do? Because they would torture them in this particular way. And if you survived, you were innocent. Sorry, if you died, you were innocent. If you survived, you were guilty. It's like, what does that mean? That doesn't even mean anything. So again, everything should be measured by a metric of court of law. Was somebody actually guilty of X? Not think, not lynch mob, not internet mob, not social media, court of law. If we can't abide by the basis of a court of law, we are lost as a society. You have to have that. And it will go your way sometimes and it won't go your way other times. It doesn't matter. And if it doesn't go your way, that is for God to decide, not you. That's for God to judge. You're no longer a part of it. Think about, again, I like to follow true crime. I have since I was actually really young. But like the Casey Anthony case, I firmly believe the woman is guilty, but she was proved innocent in a court of law. And it is for God to judge her, not me. Do I still judge her in a way that I would never be friends with her or want to have a conversation with her? Yes. Do I think it's a little weird? She's trying to do trying to do the true justice track or something. I was like, I think it's a little odd. I think she should just walk away from justice entirely. But if she was guilty, she might not have been found guilty in a court here, but she'll be found guilty in an eternal court if she really did kill her daughter. If you're not familiar with the case. She allegedly, the case, if you're not aware, it was a huge American story, but didn't get play out elsewhere. I want to say it was 2008, 2009. So it's a little bit of an old case. She had a 3-year-old daughter. She was a single mom. She lived with her parents. She disappeared for several weeks, and so did her daughter. And she told her parents, "Oh, my daughter's with me," and everything. And she was partying with different people. I think she even got a tattoo or a piercing or something. But anyway, she came back, and her mom was like, "Where's Casey?" And no. Was Casey the daughter? I can't remember now. No, I don't think it was Casey. I can't remember what the daughter's. Kaylee? I can't remember. Anyways, it's been a while. I realize I'm talking, people don't care. Anyways, but the mom opened the trunk. Her mom, Casey's mom, thought she smelled a dead body, called the cops. They started looking, and it had been a month later. This girl had been missing. This baby girl had been missing for a month. And then they eventually found her, I want to say a block from her grandparents' home. And so obviously it looked like Casey, but there just wasn't really a lot of physical evidence. And so the trial, they had a huge court case. They did it all fair, and Casey walked. It's unfortunate, but that's just sometimes what happens. Mika says the father can't. It's a security issue with the crown. Don't think so. Leo says, to be honest, I kind of blame Marius' biological father most. Nature versus nurture, but both I think were bad here. Pamela says the Harold Sonia story is so sweet. It is. But I think it also had unfortunate ramifications that they didn't quite anticipate. Shaz says, so because you are heir, you need to have a crystal ball and look to the future. Do you know how absurd that is? Yeah, you just don't know, but it's hard. But a past indicator is good indicator of future behavior. Grammy Bug says it could have helped actual royal kids so she wasn't around, and where was their father? Yeah. But it's also, if your mom's not there, if your mom is actively avoiding being home, and if the avoidance of being home was problems in the marriage, the father is going to exhibit that whether he wants to or not. Looking at history and making sure the person you're marrying knows what they are getting into. Very true. Pamela says we're circling back to suitability. Fergie, Markle, Mette-Marit, Wallace too looked pretty bad now. They do. And it all turned out to be wrong. St. Elmo's Fire says, I know, but not too royal work, but on Sandringham somewhere like Woods Farm, Harry and the kids. Mm-hmm. Azima says, William waited 10 years. Yes, he did. And that was smart. That was smart of him. He waited and got it together. Shaz says, you were fantastic on Dan yesterday, Brittany. You kept it real and didn't go with the conspiracy theories out there. Why, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm not a fan of conspiracy theories. I'm, of course, always open to new bits of evidence as they come up. But you need to have evidence, actual evidence. And I don't know if you guys are familiar. There's this meme, and it's Charlie Day. I think it's from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And there's this thing back behind him, and there's lines going everywhere, strings going everywhere. And he looks crazy because he's trying to explain some sort of complicated thing. That's what I think of when I think of some of these Meghan conspiracy theories. And, at the end of the day, sometimes if your bias is Meghan Markle is always bad or involved or something, you'll always find a way to tie her to it. And that's just bias, confirmation bias speaking. That's fitting, using the facts to fit your narrative rather than using the facts to actually drive and figure out what the narrative is. It's something that you learn too when you're doing big research projects and these sorts of things is, how to evaluate, make sure you have the right information, that everything looks correct, that it all comes together, because otherwise, you go so hard on something and then, the wall smacks you at some point. usually happens. Read, but thank you so much, Shaz. I appreciate that. Rediscover with Sharona says, Brittany, do you think Meghan was on hand? Mette-Marit, sorry. Meghan Markle, Mette-Marit, gosh, two MMs. Was on hand to parent with her royal children, or you think she was always just being a distant mom? She's like, again, I would have to read as much as I could. This might be a long process, but what I sort of see it as almost like a immature mom, that she's constantly trying to look for herself at the expense of her children and prioritizing her own self over that of her children. And yes, you're as a mom, you need to be healthy too, 150%. But children are vulnerable. Children need their mom. They need that protector. And part of, I think, being a mom and sort of growing up is understanding that their needs will most often, until they are a certain age, take precedence over your own. And yes, sometimes your needs do need to take precedence, but that is a case by case, working with a strong spouse balance to make sure that you are meeting the needs of your children while also getting things you need yourself. And I don't see why she needed to flit around the world doing that rather than just doing that in Oslo. But according to an email, she doesn't like being in Oslo. So that's just not a great look. Nika says, since Mette-Marit's father died in 2007, she may have been looking for a father figure in Epstein. I can't explain this relationship any other way. Definitely a possibility. Clifford said Andrew Lowney and Prince Andrew were together at school and thinks something happened. That is why he hates Prince Andrew. Lowney is hellbent on destroying the entire York family, and in doing so, they BRF'd. That's really interesting. I did not know he went to the same school as Andrew and maybe had personal interactions with him. That does skew the perspective of some of his research. Again, it's really hard because you can't totally take the bias out of research or even reporting. Like, that's really, really hard because we all come with our bias, our experience in our lives, whether it's going to church or synagogue or a mosque. Like, those things impact your perspective. Me being American, you being British, whatever, those all impact our perspective. And so you can't totally eliminate that from your mind because, we are all fallible as human beings. But when you have it, like I say, especially a personal aspect to the case, it does maybe kind of skew a little bit of what you're looking at. Just, that is curious. Alma's guy said there are parenting issues for sure. The shaman guy, Mette-Marit's friends, and Marius. Wonder about Martha Louise's daughters. Yeah, one of them, I think she's technically non-binary and bisexual. I think she's definitely bisexual or pansexual or something. She's something. Can't quite remember. Pamela says, I've had a crush on Hakan for years. He is a nice looking man. He's a good looking man. Marcia Co says, my mom always said, be careful who you choose to marry. Look at hereditary risk of diseases in their family and how many crazies they have on their family tree. Marius's father passed his bad seed. Yeah. And I don't think, honestly, Mette-Marit had problems too. I think, like, I've heard some sort of and her parents had problems too. And I think that, you got to be careful, of course, but you can't have somebody who sees and I've had somebody like this that I know where they have a little bit of a struggle in their family life in the beginning, early in life, but they decide to make different decisions and totally live differently than how their parents lived. And so some people can really make that decision. Some people aren't the crazy ones, but in this case, especially when you're talking about royalty, you need to have a higher standard. And of course, be careful who you marry. Make sure that it's going to work. That's a big challenge, I think, dating is figuring out where's that sweet spot. Because you don't want to be exactly like each other. That would be a little weird, but you want to make sure you have the same interests, you enjoy doing the same things, that you will be successful together as a couple. That's really important. And I think Khan definitely loves her. And I think she loves him. I'm just a little bit more suspect having read some of the emails than I was before I read some of those emails. I'll just say that. Lizzie says, one of the sisters of the king was openly vocal about the love matches of the king's children. She highly disapproved of them. Yes. And it's horrible as well. But Martha Louise's first husband, he ended his life on Christmas Day, I think it was. And he was a little bit, he was an artist, so I think he was kind of a bit more, and I hate to say this because this feels very cliche, but kind of very sensitive and going through a really hard time, like struggled with depression and these sorts of things. And it was like the first Christmas she was spending with Drek. And so he left 3 children. It's like, that's just. Janet says, absent fathers bring a whole new dimension to the children's mental health and outlook. Did his real father talk to him about the consequences of his behavior, resulting in being in jail? Consequence? Well, his dad also spent time in jail, so maybe not. Diana, good day, everyone. Hello. Chrissy Cat says, Norwegian here. Thank you for the Norwegian representation. Hakan seems to be too kind for his own good and sadly fell for not such a suitable woman. I saw him as and I'm not sure the rest of this here, but yeah, he seems very nice. He does genuinely seem like a lovely guy. This is just so unfortunate. St. Elmo's Fire says, maybe Lowney can go write about him. Did Marius go out on the balcony types? He did. He did do a couple of balcony appearances. He did. And he did like the National Day appearances. Yeah. And he was in the pictures. He was on the website until the arrest, believe it or not. Leo says, don't know how true this is, but met a girl who told me she met Ingrid Alexander and told me that Ingrid told her after the scandals Marius was drunk and showed aggressive behavior towards his sister. I would not be surprised if that is true. And again, you got to wonder what his younger siblings were exposed to, especially if the parents weren't around very much. How much of her education and some aspects of life were given by him. She gave him a very glowing, review at her 18th birthday celebration. Very glowing. Diana says, thank you for the membership. A Spark of Divine Tarot says, it's been debated they might skip a generational line of succession, give it to their oldest child. The Royal Highnesses survive it. Again, like it's sort of weird because it's like I appreciate and I think it's cool that she's in Australia getting different experiences, but I almost think that she needs to be home and like they need to get her out working a bit more. Pamela says the good old days when first cousins married royalty. There were other problems with that, though. The dreaded Habsburg chin, ladies and gentlemen. Chrissy Cat says, see him as a golden retriever type. Oh my gosh, yeah, I could so see that. He seems very nice, like just a very kind guy. Asma says Megan won't come back. She definitely won't. Megan has no desire to go back. St. Elmo's Fire says, I don't believe Mette-Marit will die before becoming queen. I don't think so, but she is definitely, she is quite ill. Clifford says Lowney is going to all the gullible YouTubers talking down the VRF. He has been attacking like Queen Elizabeth. Honestly, though, Charles is dealing with it, and I don't think he's dealing with it particularly well when it comes to Andrew. He's done some good things, some bad things, but this really was a Queen Elizabeth problem. But the unfortunate thing is, and the thing Charles did not consider, is that nobody was going to go after Elizabeth. She was his shield. She was Andrew's shield. And with her gone, everything is exposed, and I don't think he's managed that particularly well. Rediscover with Sharona says, Brittany, do you think Mette-Marit was on hand to parent the children? Oh, I think I answered that earlier. Lynn says, I find there is something off about Andrew Lowney. He is really enjoying and destroying not just Andrew and Sarah, who both deserve it, but he's going after the girls as well. It seems vindictive. I can't totally say that, but what I will say is, it's hard. Again, family dynamics are hard. We don't know the context of what the girls thought when, let's say, money showed up in their bank accounts. Were they told that money was coming? Were they part of the deal? Or did that money just show up in their bank accounts because their parents had their bank account information? And, which families do oftentimes, especially as somebody's growing up, or, because their parents had most of the money, the girls, had some money there and it just showed up. And the mom and dad were like, hey, can you put this money elsewhere? And they're like, okay. And what was Beatrice supposed to do when this, diamond necklace or whatever was given to her? Was she supposed to throw it back in, an Amir's or a Sheikh's face or whatever? Like, we don't know all the context of everything. So I'm really hesitant to rake the York girls under the coals. I'm just really hesitant to do that. Rit says Mette-Marit has a severe lack of self-regulation, and those emails show evidence of this loose mouth syndrome. I agree with that. St. Elmo's Frost says, I believe Met will die before becoming queen. I mean, I hope all the best for her health. She does have chronic pulmonary fibrosis, is needing lung transplant. And I forgot to add in my video. It's like quite convenient timing for that, I got to say. Pamela says, I forgot about Mette-Marit's bad health. This can't help. No, it can't. Jess Hart says, it's sick. These videos will have to be shown to court for the jurors. So we'll only be the judges. So that's, limits it a little bit. Zeb says, Lowney researched his book, but then he goes to talk shows and states facts, things that are not proven to be true about others. He's enjoying the platform too much, smearing others. I mean, that is definitely, you could see it that way for sure. St. Elmo's Fire says, but how boring would it be without all of us telling what they should have done? Very true. Very true. We are all armchair experts, guys. We don't know everything going on. And that's too why I'm very clear as well that I don't really have sources yet. I'm kind of hoping as I report that something will come up, but I'm very, even if sources quote unquote come up, I'm very hesitant. I need to absolutely ensure that this source is a good source, because unfortunately, I think what happens as well is when you are looking for something and you want something so bad, there are people who are perfectly willing to lie to you and tell you a story that is that exactly what you want to hear, but it's not necessarily true, even if they're a quote unquote source. So that's why I take a lot of sources, especially sometimes in the YouTube sphere that come up with people with a lot of grain of salt. I just do. Sorry, my nose is really itchy. Clifford said, and met Lowney in 2024, and he was just filled with hatred when I spoke to him. Very interesting. Alice says, it's a total witch hunt, and I hate it. Andrew is doomed now. If I were him, I'd wash my hands of the whole country and go to live somewhere else nice and ignore it all. I mean, I think that should be an option for him, to be honest. Maybe he can go to Transylvania, where Charles has a home. Technically, I know it's not Transylvania. Technically, it's Romania, but maybe he can go to Transylvania, and that might be. But yeah, witch hunts never end well. And a lot of innocent people get caught in the crossfires. And a lot of, let's say, minor crimes get exaggerated into extreme things that they never were. The witch hunts never went well for anybody, except for the people with the pitchforks. But then not really them. I don't think them at the pearly gates probably got a very warm reception in some ways. Carol said, I want evidence so I can make a decision objective. Exactly. Make an objective decision based on evidence, not just based on feelings or emotions or the feeling of the day or wanting the evidence to come to it. Because we've seen this a lot in true crime. They're so wanting the evidence to say this certain conclusion that they're constantly building towards it and they never totally get there, but they railroad somebody in that process. Instead, what I always find interesting, especially with true crimes, is that sometimes they'll go back and go, okay, let's work this as if this person is innocent. And sometimes, yeah, they build a stronger case against that person. They can find them guilty. And sometimes they're like, wait, they totally missed this piece of evidence, and we're in a whole new direction, because tunnel vision is a real thing. And it's definitely something to consider. Princess Goose says she was proved not guilty, not innocent. George says, she may not be queen after this. Everyone loves King Harold and Queen Sonia, and the children Telkon are good, but this is hard for the Norwegian people. It is. It is. Lynn says, better 1,000 guilty go free than one innocent is jailed. 100%. Princess Goose says, I believe the way the case was presented, Casey should have been found not guilty. Yeah, and sometimes it's a failure of the lawyers to argue the case well. 100%. Even if and circumstantial evidence is hard, because yes, it's sort of leading you there, but that's a very kind of slippery slope and thing to navigate, because you don't have the direct proof, but you have to show enough that it's circumstantial. Basically, is you have to prove basically it was nobody else. It could have only really been this person. Even if you don't have, let's say, a fingerprint on the body or something like that. I watch a lot of true crime, sorry. But even if you don't have a fingerprint on the body, a hair, whatever, sometimes the process is there's really nobody else who could have done this. Nobody else who had the access, the time, the motivation, these sorts of things. And so it really could have only been X person, because that's the only thing that makes sense. And and you don't always win those. Leo says, I don't know the type, but to be honest, she told me she knew her and they go to the same college. I hope it's not, but I wouldn't be surprised since it's Marius. Oh, K Coffee said Kaylee. Yeah, that's right. Princess Goose says she got a tattoo that said beautiful life. Oh, yep. And St. Emil's Fire says God will judge us all. He will. And we all think we're innocent, but we are all guilty of sinning. So we will all be held to a trial. where that goes can only be between you and God and Jesus. So that's not my realm to discuss really at all, but something to consider. Rit says, I like Dan Wooten's content, but he's gotten into just reading these long-winded things in an angry tone and cuts off his guests. Reminds me of Kinsey, just cannot listen to her long-winded speeches. I tried to be, when I talk, at least on his show, and obviously if I'm talking about myself, I try not to, but I try to I think I stick to trying to talk for about 2 to 3 minutes. I don't actually look at the time because that would be too distracting. I get distracted on lives here and I'm like, oh, the crane looks interesting on my desk. I'm very distracted by that all of a sudden. Ooh, there's a post-it. Oh, I see like a random letter and somehow I missed that random letter with the word I was trying to say. Like, I'm probably honestly a little bit dyslexic, so not as enough to get me in trouble, but like a little bit. Azuma says, did Casey tell the police the girl had gone missing? No, it was her mom who called. That was the big thing. Casey partied for a month and her daughter was technically missing that entire time. That's what was so shocking. And she tried to say, oh, I gave her to a friend or, it was a wild thing. I don't remember all of it. Azuma says she was missing for a month. Yeah. Sharon says, mom did it. Yeah. I think Casey Anthony totally killed her daughter. But unfortunately, she got away with it this side. But I think there's a comfort in knowing there's an eternal judgment. And I think she will probably be found 100% guilty there. But I don't know. I don't know. God knows. I don't know. God knows. Rediscover with Sharona says, Brittany, do you think Megan was on... Oh, we answered that question earlier. Clifford said, totally agree with you. Seems like he's not bothered about the free accommodation the cabinet ministers have, but he says nothing about that. Yeah, I mean, and I'm a little hesitant with Andrews Lowney's kind of thing of like every bit of like royal gifts and everything. Like it is all measured, but like I think he wants even more transparency into that. And I think that would just, if they did have that, would just be twisted into a negative way. Bobby says a lot of issues with Casey Anthony. The jurors came out later and said they all thought she was guilty, but did not have enough evidence to prove beyond reasonable doubt. That is right. Azuma says, isn't that a crime not to report your child missing? I think she did get some sort of child abuse type charge, but I think she got time served out of it. Rit says, anything about Casey Anthony triggers me. I cannot believe she walked free. Me either. We were actually driving in our motorhome, our family, when we heard the results of the trial. St. Elmo's Fire says 3-year-old, so precious, big brown round eyes. Yeah. Girl said that case was such a rush to court without getting the evidence to build a strong case. Yeah, and that was a tough case. Marjorie says, have you have any idea of what new revelations about Megan will be in his new book? No idea. Clifford says, you are always grounded and give balanced, thought out responses. Why, thank you. I really tried to, again, think deeply about things. And I was reading through some of the comments of my recent video with Dan and Lauren, and some people said, oh, you're not really specific. And it's like, yeah, I'm not, unless I have something really specific, because there's just some things we don't fully know. And it's always good to be measured. I really want to be measured. And I think people appreciate that, as you do, Clifford. Thank you. Azuma says, Crown Prince Haakon, as the heir, should have been thinking about the person he's marrying being suitable for the crown, not just love. That's where he went wrong. I think so a little bit, and that makes me sad. Zach's con job chat box. All right. Hi, con job. For court in France. Yes. 100% the French Revolution. It's Mark of the Divine Tarot says, not many in Norway, if any, thought Crown Princess Mette-Marit was involved in Epstein. It's disgusting. Yeah. Janet says, appreciate your intelligence, how you analyze situations and not go with the crazy ideas. Yes. I am not a fan of crazy. That's just me. I'm very much a logical person. Like Myers-Briggs, I'm an INTP, which is a little bit unusual for women. And it's like intuitive thinking, perceiving, and TP. No. Gosh, I think I can't think of the word. But anyways, the first one. But yeah, intuitive, perceiving, and the other one I mentioned, thinking. Those are my kind of key factors in how I analyze things. So Pamela says, agree. You respectfully disagree on Dan's program when it's appropriate, kept it from going off the rails at times. Thanks. Yeah, it's not my thing. Alice says, I think she might have been one of those mothers who sees her children as her friends, basically her equals, and they are not. Also, being ill might have created distance between them all. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, Janet says Myanmar did not have a good example of parenting. Why should we expect anything better from her? Very true. Yeah, her parents had something. Shaz says, "Oh my goodness, we are on the same wavelength, Clifford. It grates me that she blames Charles when the truth is late queen. It was late queen. Charles didn't have the proper say before he became king. He didn't. Now, I will say, I think for in the case of Andrew, it took I think Charles a bit too long to kind of really get it kind of under control. But like it is again, family relationships are complicated. So yeah, one of Martha Louise's children is bisexual. I can't remember if it's bisexuality or more. Christine says she has a lot of multicolored hair. Can't remember what her name is, though. Christine says, I blame both her and Hakan for how this young man turned out. While they are both off waving at crowds, making new heirs, he just got left to his own devices. Probably. Spark of Divine says, Mette-Marit's dad was an alcoholic. I think that makes sense. So Crown Princess Mette-Marit's dad was arrested for assault before. It's just not looking very good. And again, I have no issue because there are, of course, aberrations within families, but she sounds kind of immature in that she just didn't really get there. Princess Goose says, I think Marius was jealous of not being royal, but took advantage of all the prestige he did have. I agree. And again, that's his situation, as far as I'm aware, is completely unique in the royal world, at least in Europe. Completely unique, except for you could say Albert's children in Monaco, but Albert pays for their lifestyles pretty well. Albert seems like it's weird because I don't think he's a great husband, but he seems like a great dad, a great uncle, a great brother. Like he seems really great. I should have asked our French tour guide. I think I still have her email. Gosh, I should look and make sure I have it. But she had some little tidbits about the Monaco royals, and I should ask her because I think, yeah, she really liked Stephanie. She liked Albert, was not really a total fan of Caroline. Lynn Gideon says, we don't ask if you have crazy in the family of the South. We generally are proud of our crazies. I think it depends on what type of crazies. Like, are you just kind of like, or just like, mental institution level crazy? That's a different thing. Jess says, what pray tell did the queen do to Andrew? Not much. Look at all his patronage take away. Made him no longer a working royal, same as Harry. Lowe says, Montana says, Lowe or is making a barrel full of money over this. Might be. Yeah, and that's the unfortunate thing too, is like kind of sometimes the finances dictate how people continue certain things, which is unfortunate. Red says, Hakan is a handsome prince. He is. I'm thinking of somebody else, not Lowney or Lowe. Marjorie says, Prince William, I believe, is intelligent and quite savvy. He wanted a suitable family life and made sure Catherine was the right choice. Yeah, and Catherine came from a very stable family, and I think that was something William craved and what he received. And I think that was good. Lynn Gideon says, unfortunately, the choices we make are ours, not our parents. Yes, but our parents can impact how we make certain choices 150%. They are not responsible for the choices we make, but they do influence, how we are raised, where we are raised, these sorts of things all influence us for sure. Rediscover with Sharona says, Brittany, do we know much about Prince Sir Magnus character? Like, not much. I haven't heard much about him, but he seems a little directionless at the moment, which does not bode well. Lucille says, agree on knowing partner's health history. I know someone whose husband did not tell her about his mental health issues until after they had a child who was diagnosed with similar. That would make me mad. I would say that right now. That would make me really mad. Because there's nothing wrong with having it, but lying about it, different story. Princess Goose says, speaking of Casey Anthony, her parents were pretty permissive too. Yeah, her parents, they had a complex dynamic, and her parents and her have continued to be in the news in various respects, and not, I would say, a healthy way. A Spark says, Crown Prince Khan is a lovely man. Shaz says, probably because we don't have the same love that Charles has for his son, same as late Queen with Andrew. Grammy Bug says, as a victim of sibling abuse, I can say you don't have to choose an evil path. You can choose live an upright path. Yeah. And that's hard sometimes, because sometimes it's easy to fall into familial patterns and these sorts of things, but to break the cycle is hard. Kima says, hi there. Greetings from the frozen state of Pennsylvania. I'm playing catch up, but the staircase was Michael and Kathleen Peterson. Yes, it was. And I'm sorry, but I don't understand how a man could be present when, or close to, two women who died falling down a staircase. Like, the odds of that are astronomical. I still can't believe he kind of just got away with an Alfred plea. Princess Goose says, Habsburg uncle married nieces. Yuck. Pamela says, Hakan has lived as heir forever. He must expect to take the throne. He does. So Janet says, Andrew Lowney should be commended for all the research he has done to expose Fergie and Andrew. He got the real, yeah, he got some really good evidence. But again, even though he got good evidence, again, always, like think through things too. Like I enjoyed reading his book. I thought he had some really good things, but there's also some things I've questioned as well. So I think it's always good too, to like not go, oh my gosh, and question me too. I always want to say that, question me too. I would encourage everybody to read their own things, try to verify their own things if they can. And, if you have a different conclusion, that's totally fine. And I think that's a good thing. Lynn says, thank you for answering me, Brittany. Appreciate the answer. You are so welcome. I wish I remember what it was. It's been a little bit now. All right. Nika says, what do you think about the hospital visit? Did they intentionally have the pictures taken? They definitely could have. It seems like they were evaluating him for the trial. And again, I really hope he did not harm himself in any way. Stacey says, disagree about the comment that Andrew Lowney is vindictive. I think he's just digging up the truth. And yeah, I mean, I think that's 100% the case too. But it's always good though to consider what people's biases are. Always good. That's why I'm very clear about my bias. I'm not a fan of Meghan Markle. I'm not a fan of Prince Harry. I like Catherine and William. Queen Maxima is one of my favorites. Like most of the royals, I'm really loving the Danes, and they're great to me when I go over there. So that makes that love even better. But so always look at everything I say with those biases in mind. I don't hide those biases, but I'm generally I'm generally a monarchist. I want monarchies to survive, but I'm also somebody who believes in telling the truth, regardless of how difficult sometimes that truth is to hear. I believe in not really, let's say, hiding that. I believe in reviewing it, and that's just kind of how I do it. I don't know if that makes sense. Lynn Gideon says, knowing what to do and doing it often are difficult due to many shades of gray. Very true. Bobby says Transylvania. That made me laugh out loud. I mean, it's true. He could, but wow. Yeah. Like, why not? Alice Ransom Ray says, the world is such a mess right now. I am trying to the way of Pollyanna. Everyone read that book. It's great. See the good wherever you can, because you can always find the evil if you look for it. So no, very true. And there's shades of gray everywhere. There is evil everywhere. And I will say, because I felt this a little bit when I was on Dan's podcast yesterday, and as a historian, I always feel like I need to share kind of the general wisdom of history, which is that, when you look at the French Revolution, like the whole thing was, oh, we're going to get rid of the elites. It's going to be great. Like, we're going to fix everything. And what did they do? They killed a whole bunch of people in brutal ways publicly. And then the guy who started, or at least was in charge of a lot of finding the people to guillotine, was eventually guillotined himself. And there's another really interesting instance. And again, I want to do kind of a whole video looking at this, because there's so much misinformation out there. And there's so much people who, again, some people are like, they question, they're interested. And some people, it's like all conspiracy theories. And one of the things I found most interesting is I was watching the TV show Chernobyl. I didn't actually end up finishing it, mostly because when the radiation started falling, it gave me the heebie-jeebies. But one of the interesting things was this woman was a scientist, PhD, and she was noticing the fallout of Chernobyl. And she went to a guy and she's like, I've seen these things. And he's like, well, like, are you sure? And she's like, you were in a freaking factory making soccer shoes 20 years ago. And that was her thing. And what I loved about that is that sometimes in the system, like, you think you are going to, I realize this is a long intro to what I'm trying to say, that sometimes you think if you can replace the people in power, government, police, or whatever, you'll replace them and you'll be different. You won't. Power corrupts absolutely every single time. The people who are all involved in Epstein, they're like, well, let's get rid of all of them. People will just take their place and do the exact same thing. And some people, they're railing to take down the system, they'd get into the system and they'd do the exact same thing or worse. That's generally how history goes. And that's just so important, because I feel like sometimes people want to tear everything down, but sometimes tearing everything down doesn't really help. Sometimes it actually makes things worse. And you just got to be careful about that, because you might think, well, I'm so smart, but then a guy who used to run a soccer ball making factory has some authority over a PhD scientist that's telling him, hey, there's a big fallout from Chernobyl. I realized that probably didn't make any sense. So I'll work on it better. So we do have to sort of kind of wipe. I read somebody's comments and I pick out a word. We do have to wind this down just because we're getting close to 2 hours. And we just do need to sort of like, I'll probably just leave this for today, just this video. Although I do need to do one about Megan's whole Valentine's Day edit. I really want to, because I'm like, there's so many things I want to say about that. Anonymous Mouser says, I thought you were very logical on Dan Wooten. The woman you were on with seemed very intelligent, but too angry to communicate well. Why, thank you. I thought sometimes I didn't communicate well. I was like trying to think of like all the things, like what happened with Juan Carlos's kids. I think I confused people with the other royals who have been prosecuted for various things. I feel like I did confuse people there. I do apologize. Gretchen says, the problem with our current cancel culture is the lack of room for grace and redemption. Exactly. I do think there's, of course, always room for grace and redemption in situations. And yeah, and while I think obviously what Mette-Marit did was very bad and she should apologize for it, like, if she is able to find a redemption one way or another, same with Harry, same with Meghan, if they are able to do that some way or another by showing contrition and everything, I think it's good to rethink people and not just go, they're always going to be bad. Shatta says, I appreciate your joyful way of talking to us when you don't like things. Dan Wooten and many others seem to go to angry rants, which sucks the energy out of my day. I'm sorry. Yeah, sometimes I get there if I'm like really worked up about something, but sometimes I'm like, I'm good. Marjorie Kathleen says, I agree. Truth matters. Once Meghan has been proven a liar, it confirmed why I felt that she was just not right for royal life. I agree. Rediscover with Sharona says, I live in the UK, Brittany, so never heard of this Casey case. Just reading up on the case, so sad. Even worse, they've never located her body, so she could rest in peace. They did locate her body. It just took a couple of months, and she was pretty decomposed at that point, which is, sort of morbid, but very sad. Rit says, I love Crown Princess Victoria. She is raising a lovely queen in waiting as our maximum Alex. Yes, I love Victoria. I think she's a fantastic royal. And I've always said she looks like she enjoys even the most mundane aspects of royalty. And that's all you can ask for. She looks like she enjoys every single engagement, whether the most exciting or most banal. She is one of those people. She's a little bit like Anne, you can say, but I think a little bit more animated. And obviously she will be the future queen. So she has to take a little bit more prominence. But I think she is fantastic. Pamela says Chernobyl was excellent. I need to rewatch it. It was excellent. Kima says, Crown Princess Victoria chose well with Prince Andal. She did. So Alice Ransom Ray says, Brittany, there was an advert in the UK that showed the French Revolution and the rebels becoming the tyrants and so on. It was really good. Yeah. The rebels always become the tyrants at some point. This is just the basic process of history. And people always think they're going to be better. And they're just usually they're never better. Usually it ends up being worse. And that's just sad. But that's just reality of human experience. Rit says, learning more about Queen Matilda. She's a badass lover. Yeah, she's awesome. Carol says, absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. It does. And I actually think, this is just my personal theory, but I actually think like the European monarchs and these sorts of things, the ones that had like absolute power, like Louis XIV or Peter the Great or whatever, that when you have like true, total, absolute power, most of them go a little crazy. Like they're super paranoid. They're super worried about various things. They're super controlling, these sorts of things, because I think actually physically our mental capacity cannot handle absolute power. We just can't. It drives us a little batty. Every dictator is a little batty. And I don't think it's because they are actually batty. I think having that level of power, you're constantly worried about losing it. You're constantly worried about the next in line. You're constantly worried about these things because we fundamentally, as flawed human beings, cannot handle the power. We just simply can't. And people want power. And then usually, the people who finally get the power, not all of them, but there are people who want power so badly and they get it and they use it to abuse others. It's just so sad. Lily Field said, always grateful to make alive. Me? Well, I'm here. So I'm glad you made it. I was going to say me too, but I'm here. Kimma says, King Frederick chose well with Queen Mary too. He did. I think he really did. And she is somebody who cares about being royal. And I think that's really important. And in the good way. Alma Sky says, Dan is entertaining, but his breaking news, our opinions, your content is accurate. Why, thank you. Why, thank you. I just try to read to the best if I can. And it comes from years of watching royals. I've loved watching royals since really Catherine and William got married and watching all the royals. Kimma says, you're welcome, Pamela. I felt such a home in Tennessee and are planning to return this summer. It's worth the drive from Pennsylvania. Gretchen says the Danish royals seem to be raising good kids as well. Yeah, absolutely. I'm really, again, we don't know until we know, but things are looking good. Knock on wood. Ritz says, Queen Mary is pretty amazing. How she, Marie, Alexandra all learned Danish is pretty cool. Yeah, I think it's awesome. I think it's awesome. Oh, Carol said, look at Russian Revolution. Yeah, never. It just never goes well. Alice Ransom Ray says, I think that's what saved our monarchy. We had the revolution before the world was mechanized and then limited the crown's power, which created good balance. It's not perfect, but it works. I agree. I think it really does work. You need to have balance. 150% absolute power will always corrupt. And I think the Brits kind of went from, again, very as well, took the head of Charles I and then had an experience for about 10 years, the revolution. We're like, oh, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Like, went back. All right. Montana May says, glad you're feeling better today, Brittany. Keep us well and enjoy your week. Why, thank you. Yes, I was a little under the weather. Kimma says, King Frederick's brother, Prince Joachim, and his wife lived quietly in the U.S. and Washington, D.C. Love the Danish royals. Yeah. St. Elmo's Fire says, I love Queen Victoria as well, but simply adore Sophia. Watched her wedding. Her gap-toothed smile was precious. And Carl Philip, I believe her husband is so good looking. I have enjoyed seeing them. Yeah. And I think, honestly, I will say again, just to reiterate, because I don't think I stated it well on X. Obviously, Sophia was in the Epstein's files. There was a new picture that was released as part of it, but she only met him, I would argue, probably 1 or 2 times. And it seems to be her statement, which is important. Because Sophia's situation, as it came out last year, sometime in the fall, that she had had some very brief contact with Epstein. And she had stated as such and stated that's, kind of she met him a time or 2 and sort of that was it. And the latest document up proved that what she was saying was essentially correct. And that was really her mentor, who is a bit of a skeevy character, I gotta say. Her mentor, Barbara, seemed to be really pushing women towards Epstein, which got me really curious, and I want to read more of her emails. But she's really pushing women towards Epstein, and she was using Sophia's name to kind of keep Epstein engaged, and that's not on Sophia, that's on Barbara. I don't think Sophia had any part of that. Just wanting to put that out there. Lynn says that's why term limits will never happen in the U.S. I wish they would. I wish we had term limits for our congressmen and our senators, 2 terms for a senator, maybe 4, 5, 6 for a congressman, and then they're out. I don't know if we'd get anything actually done, but they at least have to go, because I think it's ridiculous. We have people in there for, decades. And like Dianne Feinstein died in her seat, basically. And she was like mentally infirm by that point. It's just like, just drives me nuts. Doesn't matter the party. It's like that she was basically non-compos mentis and still voting. It's insane to me. Doesn't matter your politics. Doesn't matter your politics. Carol said, saw a cute video of World War II vet being introduced to Queen Matilda to her husband as Philippe, King of the Belgians. It was adorable. Aww. She seems the sweetest. She seems such the sweetest. I'm looking for something in March. So, we'll see if that comes together. Paul says, no one person has absolute power. Otherwise, that would be extremely dangerous to that one person. Could press the nuclear button. Exactly. Checks and balances, y'all. Shaz says, I need to head. Thanks, Brittany, for this wonderful live. Take care, stay safe, and keep smiling in the chat. I thank you. Yeah, and we'll wrap this up here. Linkedian said amen. Carol said, Princess Sophia sounded like she told the truth. It sounds like her mentor was trying to push her into his orbit. I 100% agree. And that, again, all I said at the time, I think it was, remember, is I hope that's everything that happened, because if she didn't, wasn't fully transparent, it would be bad for her later, just like it's been for Mette-Marit, and that was not the case. Montana May said, voters putting their stairs guy in the office repeatedly are the sole reason there's no term limits. Clifford says she was like 90 something. Yeah, it was like they kind of determined later, like she had fallen and like, I don't know how often she voted. It probably wasn't much, but she was out of the office. Like she wasn't even doing her job. And it's like, why is she dying in office? Just go retire at 70. I think age limits should be a thing. Think age limits. Think once you hit 80, you're done. Paul says Sarah Ferguson wanted to marry Jeffrey Epstein because he was rich, unlike Andrew. Very true. She was always after the money. Asma says RBG should have retired. Maybe. Lily Field says periodically I think about how much effort did Mary put into becoming a royal, learning Danish, but Meghan Markle couldn't be bothered to Google the national anthem. No, she could not. Marty says Andrew Lowney's father was a judge in the UK. He is a royal historian, not a gossip author. He has had to spend a lot of money to defend himself, and he goes as he tries to open the Edward VIII files. Very true. Although I will say, one of the things I didn't really question him on it because I don't really do politics. But a part of his US release for his book, he had to take out some sections about Melania Trump. And I did think in his book when I read it that you could tell that his personal political bias against Donald Trump had impacted, like he had a little good chunk about Trump and Melania. And I was like, they don't matter. Like, and it didn't really have anything to do with Andrew and Sarah. I'm like, it doesn't have anything to do with Andrew and Sarah, maybe a little bit with Epstein, but if it doesn't have anything to do with Andrew and Sarah, it doesn't need to be in here. And he did have to take that out under threat of lawsuit. So just something to keep in mind. Lynn Gideon says, never met him, but hard to believe Jeffrey Epstein didn't get off predatory vibes. Very true. Very true. Although some people, again, I think some people meet Meghan Markle, think the sun shines out of her butt and think she's amazing. And then I see other people and I think they meet her and they clock her and they go, she is fake as all get out. I can't stand her. Like, I think she hits people two ways. And I think Jeffrey Epstein probably hit people some of that way too, that some people clocked immediately as a predator and other people are like, sorry if I hit the mic. They're like, oh, he's just such a charming, lovely guy. Rit says, Mary was all in and Meghan Markle couldn't be bothered. She's useless. Alice says, I'm not American, so I'm not sure it's for me to say, but I do find it odd that the USA says you cannot be present unless you're over 35. But if you're 80 plus, it seems weird to me. It is weird. It is weird. And like that, we have, a lot of senators sometimes and Congress people, like how old is Nancy Pelosi? She's been in there forever too. I just think people shouldn't be making a career out of politics. Even, what's his name? Oh gosh, Senator from Kentucky, Mitch McConnell. He's been in there forever and he's ancient. And Chuck Grassley from Iowa, also senator, pretty ancient. It's like, can we just Lynn Gideon says, Meghan could have had a funny motive. She tried to remember the British words were hard as we sing My Country 'Tis of Thee. Yeah, Meghan can't really poke fun at herself in a good way. It's kind of funny. Gretchen says, I wonder about Andrew Lowney having to take the Trump stuff out. Yeah, you just got to be careful. And the publisher just didn't want to get sued from Trump, especially if it's just not true. And again, some people, I think, have, a vendetta of Trump. And this is the same as Meghan. People have a vendetta. And sometimes anything becomes about Trump when it really wasn't about Trump. Or anything becomes about Meghan Markle when it's really not about Meghan Markle. Like I had somebody today say, because I was saying, I look at things logically and I'm rarely wrong when I look at things that way. And somebody says, well, you were wrong about Harry and Meghan crashing the Kardashian wedding. And I was like, no, I wasn't. There's no evidence they crashed the Kardashian party. Like there's no evidence. Like Khloe and Kim mentioned party crashers, but did not ever say it was Harry and Meghan. So it's like, you're just, again, that's one of the things where this little tidbit, because everything is negative about Harry and Meghan, you already have this bias. And that story was already circulating because I think somebody just made it up. That all of a sudden, once you have that little tidbit, oh, that fits my narrative. And that's going, even though they just said they had a party crasher, not that it was Harry and Meghan. It could have been anybody. Just again, how it's about how you look at information. Rich says, she's good for nothing and not too bright. Leo says, I wonder how Hakan feels about the Jeffrey Epstein files. I wonder if he is upset at his wife. They're very curious. Very curious. And I wonder, based on some of what we saw, if there's hasn't been some problems in their relationship that they haven't made public yet. Azima says, Bernie Sanders. Yep, another one. Paul says, Andrew Lowney had to remove aspects of the book because it was defamatory. Otherwise, he would have been sued. Yeah. Carol says, Nancy Appledorn is out of office. I'm actually not familiar with her. Oh, Pelosi. Lowney hates Trump. It's pretty transparent. Yeah, he's not a fan of Trump. I noticed that in my interview because I think he mentioned Trump there too. Okay, we'll do this last two and then we'll be done with. Clifford said Mitch was even losing as well. Look at Joe Biden, who is clearly not with it, but wanted to continue in office. He went to Angola and fell asleep during a meeting. Yeah, that no matter your politics, Biden was not fully there, and that was frightening. That people kept going, "Oh, he's fine, he's fine." He's wandering off into nowhere. He's talking to no one. Like, he's using big cue cards to talk to the press. I'm like, this is not about politics. The guy isn't there. He reminds me of my grandma who suffered with a bit of dementia. Like, that's what he reminds me of. And I'm like, that's not good. I don't care about your politics. That's bad. You can't form a sentence. Oh my goodness. Okay. Lynn Gideon says it's almost impossible to correct an error. What's in the ethos? Exactly. And some people run with it again and again and again, and people will believe it regardless of how much information you'll give them. Again, I want to do a breakdown explaining, how we just don't have any evidence Meghan was connected with Epstein, but I could lay out a fantastic case, and there will be people who still disagree with me. And not just that, like, they disagreed, like, even if in certain instances, like, the evidence is clear, they still will say, no. Oh my God, I don't know. But we'll do this one too. Poetry Chick said, off topic, what eyeshadow are you wearing, Brittany? This is a simple question to answer. So this is the nude. I feel like there was another part of it. Nude palette from Tom Ford. Eyeshadow. What is it called? I want to know why I want to make sure I give you the specific name, and now I can't find it. But Nude Dip, that's what it is. Nude Dip. So if you want it, I really like it. It's expensive, but I keep buying it because it works for me. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you really enjoyed this rather long Crown Report. I'm so sorry for the bit of the technical issues earlier today when I couldn't seem to realize my mic was turned off. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to me ramble. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your Tuesday. Bye.